know how that helps. Thank you, Chepo. I think to start off, just a bit of context in terms of my research and my study. It's actually a very young study. I'm sort of very new in my PhD. I only started in October. My proposal was only agreed to in February. So I'm sort of 5 months down the track with my study. So hopefully, Tsepo, you will invite me back in about 2 years' time when I can share some real findings and some real insights through the study. So for today, I've prepared my entire chapter 1. Basically. So somebody's going to need to keep me honest in terms of time, because I'll be talking the whole afternoon, if you allow me to. So please just check me. I did sort of 4 main sections, a bit of an introduction, talking a bit about my background, a bit more about the study, and then my research methodology. So I'm not sure which you would be interested in. If I sort of, in a space where you find that your energies are dropping, just wave, and I'll go to the next one. And hopefully we can get through this without too many questions. Given that it's a very new study, I want to forewarn you that when we get to questions, there's a lot that I don't know yet in the study. So probably the first response to a question will be, I don't know. So just be prepared for that. And it will be an honest answer, because I really need to get my head around this thing that I'm tackling, and that is that's bothering me in our world of learning. So let's talk a bit about that. Very much a working title still. An aphorism for an experienced age learning architecture. It's about philosophizing on teaching and learning today and in the next 20 years. Aphorisms, I'm looking for truth. I'm looking for axioms that we can hold on as practitioners to co-create the future. It's about an understanding of the social age we will live in the next 20 years. So it's very much a future study, really focusing on where we need to go. I would like to start off with a bit of a personal reflection. And personal reflections are things that happen when I sit under the tree. So take it for what it is, a tree thought. So in the global village we call Earth, or what we call our world, there's a global rise in the consciousness and the connectedness of its people. Through technology, information is reaching all the corners of this global village every day. No longer is knowledge contained in the leather volumes and translated through a circle of a few scholars. The place of learning, the place of work, has changed forever and is forever changing. Today, this world, this consciousness, this connectedness is our reality. And that's the reality that we need to find our future in. And hopefully through my study, I can scratch one part of that reality, even if it's a very small part of that, and contribute into a space where I think at this stage, especially learning and development and the learning space, we sort of stuck. And I want to go and find a way to move forward and look at architectures, look at an understanding of learning. This is not an L&D study. this is not a study about learning administration. This is not about the study of education and educational processes. This is a study about learning and the philosophy behind it, the underbuilt of learning. So I start this exploratory journey seeking for an aphorism, a modern truthism, for the new world of work and the new world of learning. Neskowitz in 2016 relates by indicating that the new reality we face today requires an in-depth internalization and a capacity to apply collective values which cannot be taught but only co-created. So what we're going into in the next 20 years is unknown. It is ever-changing. What we think is working today might not be working tomorrow. And I think it's time, for me, definitely, it's time to unpack this reality and to see where it needs to go. So as a scholar in the corporate training world, and that's where I find myself every day. And over the past 30 years of working in that space, I'm observing today a commercially orientated paradigm where knowledge is power. Knowing, and I'm referring to the Canavian model of Snowden, knowing, the order space, is the measure of profitable success. We measure ROI for learning. I observe countless efforts of teaching and learning, trying to apply and teach the known and the knowable, again, in the order space. I'm observing a commercially viable product with a low impact on productivity. That's the requirement. Please give me training, but don't take my people out of the workspace.
True.
Please learn them how to deal with this mad world, but just leave them where they are. Because it's about the commercial orientation, the impact on the bottom line, the impact on profit. Massive paradox. But that's what we have to deal with every day. These observations is reminiscent of an industrial age mindset. And it bothers me that the mindset is still that of an industrial age. We're long past that. What am I not observing? I'm not observing learning and teaching focusing on the complexity and the chaos, on the unorder. I'm not observing learning and teaching focusing on social construction. How do we beat unemployment? I'm not observing learning and teaching focusing on a social era after the information age that we sort of at the end of at the moment. I'm not seeing teaching and learning focusing on the future. I'm not seeing the effective use, integration, translation through pedagogy, andragogy, and pedagogy. I'm not seeing the genesis of knowledge in our learning environments. It's about teaching the known and the knowable. It's about getting people to do a job now, but not really worried about how to deal with this world of work that will be different tomorrow from what it is today. That's what is driving my thinking. That is what is bothering me of where we are today. So the background for the study looks briefly at some of the influences that may impact this study. And I don't know yet. I really don't know. This is very much still an open book. But I approach this study with that openness, where the outcomes are ideas, and where I want to go is just something that will answer this bothering question in me. I want to start with my study by just contextualizing and continuing with what I did in my master's, and make sure that the master's and all the work that I did there, with a very specific focus on a learning architecture and the role of personal significance, the human being, how does that play out in the future? I've got a belief, and maybe it's just an opinion, maybe it is just an idea, that for us to cope in the future, the one thing that will make the human being survive is personal significance. And it's going to be a very important part of a learning architecture for the future. So I want to make sure that that gets contextualized into the new study, into my PhD work as well. Another element as background to the study is the changing world of learning. Augustum 2006, Hinton and Nolan in 1987, and myself, Brunette in 2017, argues that learning is a significant process of human adaptation. How do we change? How do we adapt? Lindman, in his classical study on crisis theory in 1965 already, indicated that learning is a coping mechanism for the crisis that we find ourselves in. The crisis of that will lead to human adaptation. From crisis theory, we can argue that the purpose of learning is problem solving. A couple of weeks ago, I asked my team in the company that I work, I wrote these 2 questions on the boards in each of their rooms that they work in. Why do humans learn? And then underneath that I wrote the same question, why do people learn? And I make the note that it's not the same. Very interesting conversations erupted from why do I see humans and people different, and ended up, but why do we learn? And it was all about survival and looking at the species and understanding my job, being significant. But if you drill down in all of those things, it's to solve a crisis. It's to solve a problem at the end of the day. And we are currently, in the world of work, I think in constant crisis. We are constantly looking towards the future that we don't know. And we have to adapt to that. We have to solve the problems of futures that we don't even know about. So in the new world of work, we require new learning strategies. We require new learning paradigms. We require new learning architecture. Within the new world of learning, I'm specifically interested in understanding how learning and this new world of learning will look like in Africa. And the aphorisms for learning in Africa, I think, may be very different to the rest of the world. And we have so many influences still from the Western world into Africa. Africa is still very much the focus of the developed world. But we have to understand that those influences might not be what we need in Africa. So I'm extremely interested in how the world of learning will look like in Africa. Africa is unique in her history, her culture, and in her potential. And I think if we can find an aphorism, if we can find a learning architecture that is unique to Africa, that's what we can add to Africa being and owning its own right and its true right. So there needs to be an understanding of the changing world of work in Africa, and finding studies that focuses on the world of work in Africa and the world of learning in Africa is quite difficult because of all of the Western influences. You can find a lot of studies being done by Western universities on Africa, but not true African studies. And maybe this study would be one of those few at this moment that can add to Africa. However, I do think that it's important to understand that Africa and learning in Africa is unique, but we're not isolated. We still have all of the influences of the Western world, and they are relevant, so we can draw from them. We can apply them, we can use them, but we have to find Africa in those studies. So in understanding the context of learning in Africa, I want to explore certain constructs, specifically generation cohort theory and what is currently sort of referred to as the experience age. Those two constructs will provide a bit of insight into how the world of work looks like today, and then specifically how does the world of learning look like today. So if I look at generation cohort theory, well researched, many studies on that, but there are two specific studies that I'm interested in. Africa studies. Sobonyeni, 2015, Jonk, van der Walt and Sobonyeni in 2016. And their study specifically looks at the influences of South African history on the cohort theories. So they're defining, if you look at cohort theory and how it is made up, or what is the constructs of it, and you look at those social events that happens during a generation when they grow up, they've looked at what were the history of Africa based on South Africa. Because if we want to know that, if we know that, or if we don't want to know it, South Africa is still the pinnacle of Africa. What happens here in South Africa influenced the entire continent and the way that the continent thinks. So their study focused specifically on the history of South Africa, and they link that to the generations. So I want to unpack that and understand what are our millennials, and when I say our millennials, the African millennial, think when we talk about learning. How does the Xer, the traditional Xer, but in the African version, people that grew up at the end of the apartheid era, how do they think? How does the born free think when it comes to learning and opportunity? People that have worked through all of these struggles. It's different. Yes, it's the same as the Western world. They had their issues, we have our issues. So it's the same. but it's unique to us. And it's got a different influence in our culture. So that's what I want to focus on. And understanding what are the truisms, what are the aphorisms that sits in our people. Looking a bit at the experience age, this for me was very interesting when I started delving into this niggle that I have. Looking at the experience age is the next social era. I think our current social era where information, that is access and ownership of information, provided the competitive edge, is over. Let's just make that point. It is done. Information age were primarily made possible through the advances in technology and the access that it provided to information. So if you look at the information age, it was about who owned the information. Not just who could access it, but who owned it. And how did that ownership, that secret of information, give you the advantage? Interestingly enough, it's those same advances in technology, specifically nanotechnologies and quantum technologies, that is making information irrelevant today, because it's so easy to access. Communication in an information age started with information and who owns it. Communication in the experience age begins with a visual representation, a picture. So Darren, I hope you've got your picture.
I hope I can describe my picture.
It also, if not a picture, starts with an experience. And that's the big difference. It's not about the information, but the experience that information creates. So if you look at the future 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and this is according to Brinkenshaw in 2014 already, is that the learning experience, in the learning experience age, will not just be about sharing of information, but it will be about harnessing the employee's intuition together with the information that will provide the competitive edge. Immediately, if you think about that, harnessing your staff, the people that work with you, your colleagues' intuition when you share information, their gut feel. How well do we prepare them in the learning world to trust their own intuition, to be able to work with their intuition, to develop that critical cognitive skill? There's something wrong if it can only be a commercial viable product, if I look at learning. So apart from understanding the world of work in Africa, the most intriguing part of the study may be about these advances in technology. And I got very excited about this when I started reading and researching this specific studies. And that's about the focus, the energy, the commitment, the effort that goes into machine learning today. Writing these algorithms that we program into a machine so that the machine can teach itself and rewrite its own algorithm. If you imagine the effort that we put into that as innovation today in a hard technology versus how little we want to put into human learning, there's a balance here that's missing for me. So I'm very interested in the algorithms and the understanding of deep learning. What I've found up to this point is that in these algorithms that these very clever people, and that's the only way that I can describe them, as extremely clever, that they write these algorithms. Inside of those algorithms, at its base, is axioms, truths. And they write these axioms into the algorithm as almost the backup for the machine, for the algorithm, that when it encounters new data or unknown data, it can fall back to that axiom and say, but what is this anchor point? And it's those axioms that I am in search of for human learning. So if I can understand and find what is the axioms, the truth for the millennials in Africa today, and we can bank them, we can put them down, and we can understand the algorithms that is applied in the technology world. And this is the big idea, and it might be very crazy, but remember, it's new. Okay, my study is very new. I haven't chatted to Ben yet, so very new.
And he's taking notes.
I know. But imagine if we can take the algorithms and reverse engineer them using the axioms that we've discovered back into human behavior, back into human learning, and build a learning architecture focused on truth, whatever that truth is, and design a learning program on an algorithm, a process that cannot fail, but always linking it back to these axioms, these truisms. I almost want to understand this is an academic forum, but I almost want to say that's the dream. That's where I want to go with this study. So from an ontology perspective, so I'm going to go a bit into the academic stuff. Okay. So if I look at my ontological assumptions, given this background, given this understanding of the world that I'm in, I'm looking at what Bateson in 1973 said about ontology. And he said that ontology is the problem of how things are, what a person is, and what sort of world this is. So from that perspective, I can almost say that my study is an ontological study, because it's going to deal with what we are as a people and what this world will be that we are in. I've got about 30 years of experience, and it's that 30 years of experience in learning and development that I'm bringing into the study. I often say to people close to me and that know me and know what I do, it took me 30 years in this industry before I felt ready to study it, because of its complexity. Hopefully I'm ready. Given where I am, my thinking, the background of the study, my ontology assumptions will be based on relativism. I think that's obvious. And relativism will allow me to focus on the human experience, including the perceptions of people that are mandated through historical, cultural, and linguistic being. So that's my focus. I'm going to go and find a new reality. It builds on the premise that there are knowledges rather than knowledge. From my ontological assumptions, I'm looking at my research problem. And the research problem is encapsulated in the background that I've shared. I think it is important for me to understand that I think at this point the educational landscape seems a bit outdated. It's got a very single-phased pedagogic approach that is applied through teaching of information and not necessarily learning. But I have to go and confirm that, so please. I'm new in the study. In the corporate learning space, sometimes it feels confused and almost conflicting requirements that is given, like I mentioned earlier. Please teach my people, but do it in the shortest possible time. Please take them somewhere and make them learn this new world, but don't let them leave their desk. It's these sort of almost confusing messages sometimes that we get. I think concepts like VUCA, you're all familiar with VUCA? Sort of the world, describing the world that we're in. Very volatile, very uncertain, very complex, very ambiguous. We talk about VUCA as if it's a topic, not a reality. And I think it is our reality. So how do we get people to learn that reality? There seems to be a lack of new learning architectures focused on modern heuristics that will solve for complexity in the experience age. So given all of this, the problem this study intends to solve is the lack of a learning experience architecture based on a modern aphorism that is current and aligned to the new world of learning. The aim of the study is then to construct an aphorism which can affirm the core construct of a learning experience architecture within a complex world of learning. My objectives that I've built around this to support the aim is to describe the context and the contextual world of the new world of learning from an African perspective, to define the focuses for effective learning experience architecture, to define and describe the axioms that can anchor and balance a learning experience architecture algorithm as a problem-solving or sense-making aphorism, and to conduct a comparative literature review as a theoretical framework to balance the empirical data of the study and to formulate a learning experience architecture. So from here I've built my research question, my primary question. What would be considered an aphorism for a core construct of a learning experience architecture within the new world of learning? For each of my sub-aims, I've got my sub-questions. What does the new world of learning look like as a new learning environment in Africa over the next 20 years? What should the focus be for an effective learning experience architecture from an African perspective? What are the current axioms that can anchor an algorithm approach to structured and balanced learning experience architecture? And then what are the current theories in existence or existing out there that can describe a learning experience architecture? To do all of this, my epistemological assumptions, given the background of the study, my research problem, the aim, the questions, and my ontological assumptions, the epistemology for this study will be interpretivism. In my epistemology, I would adopt a strong path parallel to Bateson, with the view that epistemology of learning is encapsulating in the limits, the characteristics, the cognitive process of knowing, thinking, deciding, and acting. The interpretivistic epistemology is further supported by the primary principles of Mode 2, knowledge production as argued by Gibbons in 2000. Therefore, the study will be transdisciplinary in its application, heterogeneous in its span, and it will at least span 2 organizations. I'm putting a minimum of 2 because I don't know where the study will go at this point. Probably will be more. There will be social accountability and reflexivity in the interview approach that I will follow. And there will be multiple quality controls through diverse literature reviews. This will be an exploratory study through qualitative inquiry. There's still some debate between myself and my supervisor if this will be a phenomenology study or a grounded theory study. At this point in the study, I've selected constructionist grounded theory, following the guidelines of Shams. Constructive grounded theory, unlike classical grounded theory of Glasser and Strauss, redirects the method from its objectivist view to align with the 21st century epistemologies. Following the constructivist grounded theory approach, I will consider the following assumptions. Reality is multiple and constructed under particular conditions. The research process emerges from interaction with the participants and the data. The research process takes into account the research positionality as well as that of the participants. And the researcher and the research co-create the data, which is the product of the research process. Given that I will be following a constructivist grounded theory method, my approach to theory development will be based on abductive inference. Abductive strategies will allow me to search for the anomalies that will surprise and disrupt the phenomenon observed. And according to Locke and Friedman in 2004, abductive strategies means that the role of intuition, hunches, and insights are emphasized as the researcher engage in the data. So I'm really going out there to find and to scratch the surface. Looking at my research design as a strategic framework to my study, data sampling will be done through theoretical sampling process rather than a selected sample. Theoretical sampling is informed by the research process and the progress in the process. And the intent at the onset of the study is to do small samples. I'm looking at a small sample between 7 and 10 experts, expert practitioners in South Africa in the first phase of the study, and then in the second phase of the study, after multiple interviews with these 7 participants or 10 participants, I'll do a comparative study of about 3 participants in 3 separate countries in Africa as well, just to confirm what we're seeing in South Africa, how does it play out into the African countries as well. Data collection and data analysis within CGT. I will do a constant comparative process, which means that data collection, data analysis, and data interpretation is simultaneous. As data is collected, it is analyzed and interpreted, and it immediately informs the next data that needs to be collected. That is sort of under or held by and now it goes like this, and I think team. That is held by the, what's the word that I'm looking, just to complete my sentence, please? Theoretical sampling will assist that process.
All right. Thanks,
Cool.
And thank you so much, Cliff. I think you were very eloquent. Tumi, I'd like you to come sit here. Tumi is from our research office, so he'll be facilitating the questions and recommendations through to Cliff. Good luck, Cliff.
Thank you.
Yeah. You've got 15 minutes.
Got 15 minutes.
Exactly, it's not a lot.
Thank you very much, everyone. Cliff is engaged in a doctorate or a PhD study. So he's relatively new. It's a lonely journey. For the next actually 3 to 6 years, Cliff will be probing the the problem that he will be researching. For the next, as I said, 15 minutes, we'll open up for questions, and then I'll also ask him some of the questions. Just to start, maybe just to open. Cliff, if you can put it in simple terms, what is this problem that you'll be probing for the next 3 to 6 years? What is this thing that you'll be looking for in the next 3 to 6 years?
In very short, non-academic terms, it's about finding relative learning. Learning and learning opportunities that is relevant to the learner and helping the learner to deal with the complexities of the world, the complexities of their workplace every day. So I don't think it is about following a procedure anymore. We see it often when we deal with the banks and something like customer experience, for instance. You can teach them a recipe, but the next customer that walks in, that recipe doesn't work. So now what do they do? So we have to teach people to think.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we've got a strong enough learning architecture currently to do that. So in short, that's what bothers me.
Now, among us here, there are people who have studies, there are people who are in industry practice, there are students. In this journey, a doctorate journey, it's a very, very lonely journey. So today, you're given an opportunity to help Cliff in his journey, to raise questions, to help him actually think about this research problem. Hopefully among you, you'll be able to highlight things that he has not thought of. If I can start with the questions, who would like to help Cliff in his journey? Questions. We're going to start at the back there, and the third one there. Yes, sir.
Hi, Cliff. My name is Alan Barnard. I have a decision science lab. So we work with leading organizations around the world, specifically around why people make and often repeat bad decisions. There's something that you said that I want to just pick up from and ask you to maybe think about reframing it, because you just explained now the problem that you tried to solve in a very different way than you were when you were speaking in the academic terms, right? So first of all, knowledge is not power.
Yes.
Applied knowledge is not power.
Yes.
Applied knowledge that solves problems is power in a unique way.
Yes.
Does it make sense?
Yes.
So you were describing what you were trying to do is you really are looking for ways of teaching people to think.
Yes.
Right? Thinking is a part of learning, but it's that part that we've always thought was uniquely human. Every time we think that humans are unique and special and valuable, we get disappointed, because we find out that actually all organisms have exactly the same structures as we do, and computers, by the way, can do things much faster and better than we do. So I think part of the challenge that you've got is that for any group of people to become valuable, they need to learn how to think. And what machine learning is teaching us is that there's a process to think. And I want you to think about that, is to say, are you not looking for what is the process we can teach people to think in a very deliberate, systematic way that has a clear objective, which is how to add value to whatever society I'm living in, to whatever organization I'm working in. So that to me would be a different way of looking at it, is to say learning is thinking. And you need to find a way of teaching people how to think in a very systematic way. Computers don't make mistakes. They don't have inherent biases, right? They can do the same thing over and over again. They don't get bored. They don't have cognitive dissonance. But those things are also the things that make them fallible. Because if you think about evolution, if we didn't make mistakes, we couldn't learn. Right? If we didn't have biases, we couldn't make subjective decisions. We tried to get rid of biases in society, not realizing that's the only way we are able to make decisions in a VUCA world, right? If I don't have a bias towards one of you, I could never find a partner. It would be impossible to decide because there's so many things to consider. As we need those biases, and that's kind of what makes us uniquely human. And part of that learning process of learning how to think is how do I exploit what makes us uniquely human to be able to solve problems in a very practical way.
Very true. I think there's so much that resonates from what you're saying. It's definitely to go there and to understand that machine learning path, but also not to the extent that we will become machines. There must be still a very clear distinction between the human being and the human doing. And we must always keep that. So it's how do we unpack this study?
I think one of the factors that you have to consider is whatever is easy for computers, they're going to be doing.
Yes.
Right? They don't care where you come from. We're going to be losing jobs at a massive rate that we've never seen before. It's going to start with drivers, right? We're going there. It doesn't care where you come from, right? You can't drive better than a computer. That's the reality. Because of all the things that make us uniquely human. And each of the jobs, there's a very high risk that all of those jobs will go towards computers and robots. So that to me is, you need to think about very practical term. Africa, more than any other continent, is more vulnerable, right? Because we are not teaching people to think. We're teaching people stuff that is completely irrelevant in the real world. History and all of those things, as we're teaching people to memorize. If kids fail, they feel dumb. You can Google it, right?
That's my point.
And yet we're asking kids to write exams and to memorize stuff. Completely idiotic in the real world. So I think that's using some of that might help you to focus in terms of what would be a valuable contribution.
Definitely.
For me, there's a theoretical incongruence between everything that you said about the unordered world and the reality of that, and the statement that you made that in your dream, you're looking for a process that cannot fail, which is very ordered. And as soon as you look into the mechanistic world of algorithms, you're on the right-hand side of the Canadian framework. So I'm just putting that to you as incongruence that somehow you're going to need to reconcile.
There is a lot of these, what do you call them? Contradictions, but a lot of the paradox that exists still in here, and putting it on paper, and thankfully there's an academic process that will keep me sane.
And maybe just another thought is that in terms of your sample and the people that you're going to involve in your study, you use the word expert practitioners. So again, and let's refer to the same framework, the minute we talk about expert, we're saying expert now. Expert in the here.
Very true.
So what is it that's going to give you the insight into the future? And possibly, you talked about transdisciplinarity, but I didn't see that coming through.
Very true.
Maybe in the transdisciplinarity there might be an answer to that.
Well, that's a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The lady?
What would you say is the biggest objection you're going to face?
Very difficult to answer, but if I have to go off the top of my head, commercial orientation. Profit.
Okay. Now, we've got three more, Prof, Moira, and then Anne.
I think one of your challenges would be that you're going to fight with what exactly Alan is making you aware of, which is the systematic process. We come over centuries of a neuron pathway that makes us show up the way we show up.
Yes.
So that's going to be.
Yeah.
Now that commercialization may be part of it, truly so, but there's a deeper grounding, there's an axiom, a so-called reality around systematic and process. So I just want to tease your mind and say, I wonder if you would have juxtapositioned what Alan has shared about systematic and process with systemic and probing. I wonder where that would lead you. And I love, Janet, what you added about the expert piece. And I would challenge you, I hope you would consider a grounded theory approach. I would be less worried whether you go Shams or Lasser. I think those are, for me, neither here nor there. But I would hope that you would consider more voices than 7 and 3. I think you should go much deeper and wider than that. Even if that takes longer. But I will be less worried about what is the outcome as opposed to what will emerge. I don't think you must, because if you're worried about the outcome, you're trapped in a systematic process.
Yeah.
That's my view.
Yeah.
And
No,
Alan,
I
I will
agree.
have long battles with you around this. But if you're interested in what will emerge, it may be something different.
Yes, definitely. I agree, Ben.
And
Thanks.
just for clarity, so by process I mean like trial and error, right? That's embedded in us as humans, as we learn through trial and error. The thing that where we don't learn is because we are scared to make mistakes, and then it jinx the process. But that's like a pragmatic process by which somebody could learn, and then creating the environment where it's safe to fail and where people can absorb the complexity, etc.
Okay, Maura?
My questions, or perhaps points, are artificial intelligence cannot be the basis of human learning because human beings are more than machines. You have to take into context the element of contextual, the situational environment, plus personality. Is the person right-sided brain oriented or left-sided brain oriented? That also includes that as well. And also in terms of, so it also, as you said, made mention that the African culture and context is very much different. I think you may, that there's obviously, you are aware that there's different cultures, that do also, contribute to the element of how people actually learn. Because learning is based on their socialization aspect. So I think maybe you have to look into that aspect, into socialization from the word go. And then also, in terms of, in the future, machines will be running the world, I think not. I think the human element will be required, particularly so from maybe even the hotel industry. Different industries will be, that human element will be required. So based on the VUCA element, I think you have to see how, crucial human beings will be and what the impact will be from an applied knowledge perspective. Yeah. Then also, I think just also the social connectivity. I like the fact that you mentioned connectivity, because the element of the world changing, everything is the social media, and how does that particularly impact on learning itself? Because I think rather than going to books, people are now turning to Google to say, so how do I, or what are the best steps of? So I think maybe that element should also be taken into consideration, and that's it.
Cool.
Okay. Anne?
Thank you.
Thank you, Maura.
Okay.
Anne?
Thank you so much for what you presented. I think for me, I resonate with what many have said, but and in particular what the lady has indicated. Of course, our socialization will no doubt influence and impact the way we think and we engage. Being a learning practitioner and also coming from the OD space as well, one of the things you had indicated is the context around the corporate environment. To what extent, in terms of your study, are you going to look at changing the actors that's the thinking of the individuals, and they then being placed within an environment where when they go back into the system that you're engaging in, those individuals either have not shifted or alternatively have an inability to shift. So that's one of the concerns. Then the other concern that equally comes to mind in this goes to the fact that we all learn differently, and that's one thing. And then secondly, what is the difference in terms of like millions of years ago and learning now? Because it's the same principle that has been carried through, that no doubt it will obviously change, and the adaptability around that. So in terms from a principle perspective, what really is changing? So those are the things that from within the context of corporate, and then just from a learning perspective, what is changing, because we adapt, we move, and like, I mean, however old we are, maybe 30, 40, I'm not the same when 10 years ago. And therefore, what is so different and what is so new?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyway, Prof, and then... Okay, yeah.
For me, what comes to mind is how this study will apply to Africa. When I think about corporate South Africa and L&D, or learning in general, part of it is driven because there's a regulatory requirement from government that drives that need and budgeting of it.
Yeah.
And typically when they're cutting back, that's usually the first departments that need to be cut back.
Yes.
Ironically. A lot of African countries don't have the same requirement from a legislation point of view to make sure that there is workplace or corporate learning happening. Not to say that learning is not important, but it's not perhaps designed and driven in the same way that it is in South Africa.
Yeah.
So that is perhaps something to look at in terms of what is learning and what isn't learning in the corporate space in Africa.
Absolutely.
For companies that aren't South African going into Africa.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think that is where I'm looking for the surprises. What's going to surprise us out of Africa? Definitely.
I think anybody else? Just the two, Reem and Brian?
Perhaps the question in my mind is, how can we value and acknowledge the learners more in the process, to tap into where they are, and then not do it for them, but do it with them. How can we do more of that?
Yeah, the
because then we
co-creation.
can tap into the richness that's already there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brian?
Cliff, I think if I can summarize your problem or your statement, it's learning in a VUCA environment, what is required. And there was an excellent lecture which happened at Vinci last year, given by Professor Roy Marcus on design thinking. And I think that design thinking was concerned with how do you cope with decision making in a VUCA environment. And I think then you might find that there's some parallels to link design thinking into learning.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's definitely on the cards. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Brian.
I want to ask something. The more we talk just in this iterative discussion, I wonder if you are appreciating the emergence here. What I see is also an emergence of the interplay between education, learning, and culture.
Yes. Yes,
Because
definitely.
I'm curious whether you're looking at learning or whether you're looking at education. Because as long as we believe that commercial, as is raised here, is an issue, well, commercial is a culture that is overlaid on learning, which take the form of education.
Yes.
But that's not learning.
100%.
Because if we really go to freeing the mind, we won't need schools 100 years from here. Because why do I need a school? We won't need that fundamentalistic institutions, which you may either call government or you may call schools, to tell me what is good for my brain.
Yeah.
My brain will tell you what is good for society. So I'll be curious to know whether you want the energy flow going that direction or whether you want to stick with the norm that the energy flow will be directed by someone.
Yeah.
I'll be curious to know where you're going to.
Where I do want to go, Ben, is the learning, not the education.
But then you have to consider the direction of the energy flow.
Yes, exactly, and that's why it's really going to explore this and understand what will come out of it. It's not that it must be a new educational system or paradigm for education.
Just one last point.
Yes, Mara.
I also want to say that in terms of, I think, because we were discussing with Brian earlier, in regards to that there's now an emergence of positive psychology. So I think that's also an element of learning that you could also consider in regards to not focusing on the weaknesses and the problem, but focusing on the person's strengths.
Yeah.
And based on that, you pull out, that element of thinking and for themselves, because now they value themselves and they see the worth in themselves. So being solution-based as opposed to problem-based, that also might be an element that you can research.
Very true.
everyone, thank you very much for your contribution. But I think just in closing, I just wanted to, there is an issue that is very personal to me because I'm an academic. When somebody speaks and said, no, I'm not speaking in non-academic terms, I'm speaking in practical terms. It's a challenge for us as academics because we believe that we are academics to teach people scientific means of solving practical problems. So I think one of the things that I think about that thought about you engaging in an academic journey, and yet you started engaging with me to say, let me speak in a non-academic terms, which I found.
I'm sorry to me, and I did that very consciously.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't find myself in the academic world yet, being the study being so new. So I'm very aware of that.
Yeah. Because it's a challenge for us because, you know, we are actually engaged in an ancient practice. When you think about PhDs and a doctorate, these are actually ancient practices. At the end of this journey, you're going to get a qualification, and yet it's like you're getting something that is old, but you want it to change. Now, another issue that I'd like you to think about, in a traditional PhD setup or a doctorate setup, you are adding something new. Or you have identified a gap that there is something missing within the body of knowledge. And I would encourage you that as you're talking about your problem, think about what's this gap that you're trying to fill? What's this knowledge that you're trying to fill? Yeah. Anyway, Cliff, thank you very much for your time.